President Trump is weighing options for military action in Iran as the country's government is cracking down on widespread protests. Trump suggested to reporters that Iran is starting to cross a red line, with some human rights groups reporting that hundreds of protesters have been killed in the past couple of weeks.
According to the New York Times, some of the options being considered included strikes on non-military sites in the capital city of Tehran. In a True Social post on Saturday, Trump wrote, "Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help."
The protests are rooted in economic turmoil as the country faces soaring inflation rates, but as the protests have grown for the reasons, many of them have become more varied. Many of those are now marching in the streets or protesting the Iran's regime as a whole.
Iran's supreme leader has hit back at Trump's threats of military action, even going so far as to blame Trump and the U.S. for the protests. Here to discuss with us is Iranian-born writer Trita Parsi. Trita, thank you for being with us again.
Thank you so much for having me.
What do you make of what's taking place now and the motivations for it? And is there some likelihood that this will result in a shakeup of the Iranian regime?
These protests, without a doubt, have shaken the very foundations of this regime. And I think it's quite clear that they do see it combined with the threats that Trump has made as an existential threat. We have seen the protests slow down significantly in the last 2-3 days, though. And that is most likely as a result of the very, very brutal force and violence that the government has used against the protesters. And of course, I think it should be noted, one thing that really sets these protests aside from previous protests is that there is also a level of violence from certain elements from within the protest movement that we frankly have not seen before. But nevertheless, the fact that it's slowed down does in and of itself not in any way, shape, or form suggest that it's over. These things have a rhythm of their own. They can slow down for a couple of days and then pick up again. And even if the regime manages to clamp down on the protests and there's no more protest on the streets, reality is that the underlying issues that prompted the protests, which, as you pointed out, is partly the economic, but largely, of course, the tremendous anger that exists in society against the government overall because of not just economic malpractice and corruption, but also the societal pressures that they're under. None of those go away automatically, and we've not seen any clear plan from the government to do anything about those things. So I would not say that the slowdown of the protest in and of itself is an indication that this issue really is over.
Now, Iranians rightfully are feeling oppressed and revolting against this regime, but I want to ask you about U.S. intervention. I mean, would it be helpful to have the U.S. involved there? And what do you think all comes attached with us going there and trying to do some sort of regime change?
I think that the likelihood is that this would more likely than not be unhelpful. Take one thing, for instance. The Iranian military, the regular army, which is very separate from the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, have traditionally stayed out of these issues. Even before, when they have been ordered to, position themselves in towns, etc., when protests have been taking place, they have actually refused to do so and said, that's not our issue. Our dealing is only with national security matters. This time around, however, the head of the army has come out and said that they will take part because they see that the country is under threats of, I think, what they call terrorist cells. It's an indication of how these protests are taking place in a context in which there are clear threats from the outside, from Trump, from the Israelis, etc. And as a result, the army, which never done this before, is now saying that they're also going to be taking part of securing the country internally. So I think we already see some clear indications that that type of an external threat has actually consolidated the regime more so than causing splits. That can, of course, change. But given the track record of the U.S. Interventions in the region as a whole, combined with what I just mentioned, I think the likelihood of this actually ending up quite badly is higher than this some way, somehow leading to a very successful revolution and everyone will live happily ever after.
Is there anything we can do, short of direct military intervention to give moral or maybe more than just rhetorical support to a freedom movement, to a movement that wants to oppose or perhaps displace an authoritarian government, without it becoming any of the things you've just said, or we don't want to be involved in matters in the Middle East, particularly. Much of Trump's America First base doesn't either. That would not be constitutional, I would argue. But what can we do that would do some good in line with principles we would like to support?
Reality, America's options are very limited in this sense, and it's partly because the connectivity with Iran is so low because of years of sanctions and very, very bad relations. I mean, I personally think that if the United States had managed to stay with on a course of improving relations and having more trade, the U.S. would have had far more leverage than it currently has. I mean, the fact that the only option that comes to mind for Trump is to take military action is an indication of how little leverage the United States has. If the United States and Iran actually had more normal economic relations, which would have happened if the JCPOA had continued, the U.S. could have threatened all kinds of other things in order to pressure the Iranian government that would have stayed short of military action, stayed short of the U.S. getting dragged into wars, etc., while also having a higher chance of having an impact, a positive impact. But we have kind of done away with those options because of the course of foreign policy that we've taken. And at the same time, that has also contributed to the absolute misery of the Iranian people that is causing them to go out on the streets and protest because they're just seeing no other ways. So I think in general, when you take a look at what the policy has been thus far, it's a key reason as to why we need to have leverage and why the situation, why it has contributed to the situation being so bad that people feel this level of desperation.
Now, you've been critical of both the Iranian government and you've been critical of the Israeli government. You've been critical of the U.S. response. In about 30 seconds, can you explain to us why, you can be critical of all sides, but then what the next step would be? I mean, do you just want Iran to figure it out for themselves?
I mean, ultimately, the Iranians absolutely have to figure it out for themselves. For there to be a real democracy in Iran, it has to come from the inside. It has to have that type of internal legitimacy. The question is, what is the posture that the outside world, the United States, can take that, on the one hand, enables that to happen indirectly, and on the other hand, does not do things that stands in the way of a more natural, organic process towards democratization driven by Iranians themselves, and at the same time secures U.S. National interest. And I think, again, some sort of a managing relationship between the two countries, economic relations that would enable to have the U.S. for the U.S. to have influence, but at the same time also moving the economic situation forward, which then creates those type of pressures from society in which they do no longer accept the type of political limitations that are put on them, but they're not challenging it out of a point of economic desperation. They're challenging out of a point of economic liberation, in which, because they have that economic capability, they also want to have their political freedoms. This path has been proven much more successful in other cases before. It's just not a path that we have tried with Iran.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, Fed Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has a message for the Trump administration. Don't go anywhere.